She saw death up close, but something even more terrifying was waiting. In the bustling terminal of Charlotte Airport, Evelyn stood with her arms tightly wrapped around her daughter Sarah, as if the moment had slowed, and time itself had become an enemy she could not stop. Sarah, just 15, was ready to board a flight to Seattle for a prestigious national youth leadership program. The terminal was teeming with life. The usual cacophony of rushing passengers, announcements over the loudspeaker, and the hum of rolling suitcases. Yet, in that moment, Evelyn's world seemed to pause, as if the whole world had faded, leaving only this one precious moment with her daughter. Sarah had been preparing for this day for months, a moment she had looked forward to, a chance to be on her own, to prove herself. Evelyn had always known this day would come, the day her little girl would take a step toward independence. But standing there, holding Sarah's hand one last time before the flight, Evelyn could hardly keep the tears from welling in her eyes. She wasn't ready for it. She wasn't ready to let go. "Don't forget to text me when you land," Evelyn said, her voice thick with the weight of unspoken emotion. She adjusted Sarah's jacket, smoothing it down one last time, as if by doing so, she could somehow protect her from whatever might come. "I will, Mom. It's just a flight. Don't worry about it," Sarah said with a smile, her voice light. But there was a flicker of something else in her eyes. Nervousness, a hint of fear hidden beneath her confident words. Evelyn could see it, the quiet anxiety that Sarah was trying to mask. Evelyn took a moment to steady herself before looking deep into Sarah's eyes. She wanted to say something important, something she hadn't said before, something she wasn't sure she'd have the chance to say again. "May God take you in peace and bring you back whole," Evelyn whispered, her words barely above a breath. She took a deep, shaky breath before continuing. "And if something goes wrong, trust your instincts, trust yourself, no matter what happens, always." Sarah gave her a small, reassuring smile, the kind only a teenager could offer, one that was meant to calm and reassure, though Evelyn could tell it was just as much for herself as it was for her mother. "I will, Mom. I promise." Sarah's voice was steady, but her hand clutched her mother's a bit longer than usual, and Evelyn held onto it tightly, savoring the warmth and the comfort of the moment. Then Sarah gently pulled away, her eyes flicking toward the gate. "I love you," Evelyn whispered, though her daughter was already too far ahead to hear it. She watched as Sarah walked toward the gate, her figure becoming smaller and smaller with every step. For a moment, Evelyn stayed rooted to the spot, her heart aching. She wanted to chase after her, pull her back and hold her close again, just like when Sarah was a child. But she knew she couldn't. Sarah was growing up. Sarah was going to fly, both literally and figuratively. And Evelyn couldn't protect her from that. She couldn't protect her from the world. 2 hours later, high above the vast stretches of the Bitterroot Mountains, Sarah's flight was peaceful. She watched the clouds drift lazily beneath the wings of the plane, the rhythmic hum of the engines easing her nerves. It was everything she had imagined it would be. Smooth, quiet, nothing to worry about. She settled back into her seat, flipping through a book she'd brought for the flight, occasionally glancing out the window at the breathtaking scenery below. She had everything under control. Everything was fine. But then suddenly everything changed. The plane jolted violently, throwing her against the side of the seat in front of her. The sudden shift in pressure was deafening. The lights overhead flickered once, then went out completely, plunging the cabin into darkness. The air in the cabin seemed to freeze. A collective gasp echoed throughout the plane as the sharp screech of metal tearing apart filled the air. It happened too quickly for Sarah to understand. The plane lurched downward uncontrollably. The roar of the engines suddenly cut out, replaced by a hollow, terrifying sound, the sound of the plane falling from the sky. She couldn't catch her breath. Her heart raced in her chest as the world twisted, spinning out of control. Her stomach flipped as if she were weightless, falling through nothingness. The force of the fall was overwhelming, and before she could process it, the world went black. When Sarah regained consciousness, she felt disoriented, her body heavy with pain. She tried to move, but her limbs felt stiff, unresponsive. Her head throbbed with a fierce pulse, and her mouth tasted bitter, the taste of blood. But there was something else: dust, dirt, and a faint, acrid smell of smoke. She struggled to open her eyes, blinking against the pain. When they finally focused, the sight that met her was almost too much to comprehend. The sky stretched overhead, a bright blue, but everything below was chaos. The ground was littered with twisted metal and debris. The unmistakable wreckage of the plane lay scattered across the forest floor, parts of it still smoking. The sounds of muffled cries filled the air, but they were distant, as though coming from a different world. Sarah's body was still strapped to her seat, but she could feel the jagged edges of broken glass and twisted metal against her skin. Her seatbelt was tight across her chest, pressing painfully against her bruised ribs. Blood ran down her face from a gash on her forehead, but she was alive. Somehow she was alive. Her first instinct was to get out of the seat, but her limbs didn't obey her immediately. She felt dizzy, unsteady on her feet. The world around her seemed to tilt, and her vision swam with every movement. She reached for her seatbelt, hands trembling, and after what felt like an eternity, she finally managed to release it. The effort drained her, but she couldn't stay there. She couldn't just wait. The wreckage around her was silent now, save for the occasional groans of twisted metal settling. She looked around, trying to make sense of what had happened. The plane, the passengers, the wreckage, everything was scattered. The thick forest around her was eerily still, and it felt as though the whole world had fallen silent, waiting for her to make the next move. She stood, swaying, her body protesting every step. She tried to call out, but her voice was hoarse, swallowed by the immense silence that surrounded her. The trees loomed tall, blocking out the sky, and everything seemed so vast, so impossibly distant. Somewhere in the wreckage, she could hear faint cries, people calling out for help, but Sarah couldn't see them. She couldn't find them. The wreckage stretched in every direction, a nightmare of twisted metal and shattered pieces, each one a reminder of the catastrophe that had just unfolded. With great effort, Sarah began to move, one shaky step after another. She had no idea where she was going, no idea where to start, but she had to keep moving. She couldn't let herself fall into despair. She had to help the others. She had to survive. As she stumbled forward, her thoughts were a blur of pain, confusion, and fear. But one thing was clear: she was alone. And yet, even in the emptiness, a flicker of hope remained. A small voice deep within her told her to keep going, that she wasn't alone, not entirely. Her mother's voice echoed in her mind, reminding her of the promise she had made just hours before. Trust yourself, always. She didn't know if she could, but she had to try. For herself, for the others, for everyone who was still out there. Sarah's world had gone quiet. The sounds of the crash, the chaos, the screams, all of it had dissolved into a heavy, suffocating silence. The only noise she could hear now was the rustling of trees in the distance and the faint hum of the wind. Her body was battered, bruised, her head throbbing with pain from the impact. Blood trickled down from a gash on her forehead, and her clothes were torn, barely hanging onto her frame. But she was alive. Somehow, despite everything, she had survived. But survival was no guarantee of safety. The crash had torn through the sky like a violent storm. And now, in the aftermath, Sarah found herself alone in the wilderness, stranded between the wreckage of a broken airplane and the vast, endless forest. She stumbled through the trees, her legs shaking beneath her as she fought to remain upright. The weight of what had just happened hung on her like a heavy fog, too much to process, too much to understand. Her thoughts were scattered, but one thing was clear. She couldn't stay where she was. She couldn't sit and wait to be rescued. If she was going to survive, she had to act. She kept moving, pushing herself forward, even when every part of her wanted to collapse. Her stomach growled with hunger, but there was no food. Her mouth was dry, and the cold air stung her skin. Still, she kept moving. Her first instinct had been to search for other survivors, but after hours of wandering, calling out, listening for any signs of life, Sarah had begun to realize that most of the others were either too far away or, she didn't want to think about it, gone. She was alone, completely alone. But she couldn't give up. She wouldn't give up. Not when there was still hope, not when she knew someone, somewhere, would be looking for her. At some point her legs gave out beneath her and she fell to the ground, her hands bracing her fall against the dirt. She stayed there for a long time, breathing heavily, staring up at the sky, the wind blowing through the treetops. She closed her eyes and tried to center herself. The pain in her body was overwhelming, but the fear was worse. She had to stay strong. Then in that stillness it came, the thought, the prayer. Please, God, if you're out there and if you're listening, just send my location to my mom. Let her know where we are. Let them find us. I don't care if I'm saved. I just want someone to know we're here. Sarah didn't know where the words came from. She didn't know if they meant anything at all. But as she whispered them, a strange peace settled over her. It was as if, for the first time since the crash, she wasn't completely alone. The world didn't feel as empty. She couldn't explain why, but something deep inside her told her that she wasn't just speaking into the void. Somehow, someone, somewhere, would hear her. She clung to that belief like a lifeline. The night dragged on. Sarah stayed huddled in the makeshift shelter she'd created, shivering from the cold, barely able to keep her eyes open. But she kept them closed, waiting, hoping, praying for the sound of something, a helicopter, a voice, anything. Then, just as she was beginning to fade into unconsciousness, she heard it. The unmistakable sound of rotors, the chopping rhythm of a helicopter cutting through the air. Her heart skipped a beat. With all the strength she could muster, she dragged herself to her feet, her legs unsteady beneath her. She scanned the sky, desperate to find the source of the sound. She raised her hand, waving it frantically, using the piece of broken aluminum she had found earlier in the wreckage to catch the sunlight and reflect it toward the sky. The chopper came closer, and soon the figure of a rescuer appeared at the edge of her vision. She couldn't believe it. She was found. They had found her. As the helicopter descended, she could barely keep her eyes open. She was dizzy, her body weak, but the sense of relief that washed over her was like nothing she had ever felt. The pain in her body didn't matter anymore. She had made it. They had made it. She collapsed into the arms of the rescuers, her body giving in to the exhaustion it had been holding off for days. But even as she closed her eyes, she knew she was safe. She had survived. If this story moved you, make sure to subscribe for more powerful stories of hope, courage, and survival. Each story is a reminder of how strength and faith can change everything.